unless we find it against him concerning the law of his God. Now, just a little bit of history right here. We know from several ancient historians that King Darius was probably about 62 years old when this takes place. Yes, Mac? So Mac just said that there was a setting on the first one that would not allow comments, so that he needs you to switch over to the other stream. I don't even know what that means, but is it pretty evident what they need to do, Mac? Okay. Once again, you can put it in the comments section, or you can text me, 910-988-8982. So, King Darius was about 62 years old when all this happens. Now, something else to keep in mind, King Darius had led a rough life. King Darius had been dealing with revolts and rebellions for many, many, many years. He had been a warring king. He had been a king who's had to fight, who had to deal with a whole lot of civil unrest. Multiple times before he became king, the people that he was king over rebelled against their leaders. Even after he became king, in the first 2 years of Darius's reign, there were multiple attempts to seize power and to overthrow him. Now, when we get around 62 years of age, which incidentally was a pretty good ripe old age back in that time, what is it that we start thinking about doing, some of us, when we get around 62? Retiring, taking it easy, stop working as hard as we've always been working, and be able to enjoy life. Darius, after living so long and spending so much time in a warring life, decided that I'm going to try and take things easy. We know that because of the governing steps that he took. Because of all the upheaval, because of all the revolutions, Darius decided to install kind of a 3-tier system of government. Now, it starts out with 120 satraps. Satrap is an old Persian word that means protector of the realms. Now, in some translation, it calls these guys presidents. In some translations, it calls these guys governors. They were supposed to be the first line of leadership that people went to. These 120 were supposed to be out over all of the lands that Darius controlled, and people were supposed to report to them any problems so that Darius could relax a little bit and so that people would have access to the government. Over these 120 satraps, King Darius appointed 3, depending on what your translation says, either 3 presidents or 3 governors. Now, these 3 were to report directly to him. The 120 were divided up. I'm not exactly sure if it was an even or just a regional divide up, but these 120 were supposed to report to the governors, and then these 3 governors would report to King Darius. This is the 3 layers of government that Darius imposed. He did this, number one, to give himself some rest, because this was a pretty big kingdom he had to rule. And by doing this, it would enable him to have a little bit of a break. He also did this so that people would have access. If they had a problem, they could go to one of these people and it would work up the chain of command till it got to Darius. Well, not only were there these 3 governors and 120 satraps, there was also a group of advisors that was intermingled between the governors and the satraps. These advisors served kind of a lot like our political people do today, to advise, to counsel, and to help the various leaders. Darius wanted a peaceful rule. That is why he implemented these leaders. It's also alluded to in verse 2. Verse 2 says that the king did this so that the king would suffer no loss. He didn't want another rebellion. He didn't want people fighting. He wanted to give people a chance to talk to him. So he put this governing system in. Like I said, he didn't want anybody to rebel. He didn't want any area to break away. One of the things that really jumps out at us is who is one of the people that is appointed as one of the three presidents or three governors here? Daniel. Daniel is selected, and this is kind of interesting because Daniel was one of the exiles from the land of Jerusalem. He wasn't a purebred from this area. He was an exile. Now, it was common practice in that day and time when a leader conquered a foreign land that the leader would go in and take the best, the most beautiful, the smartest, the most promising people out of the conquered land and bring them back to his own land and have them serve there. Daniel obviously was picked up in one of these and brought back to serve King Darius. We see that Daniel's got a pretty important job right here. After all, being below the king and being one of only three governors or three presidents, that's pretty high, isn't it? Daniel is doing pretty good. In fact, Scripture tells us just how good a job Daniel is doing at this. In verse 3, we see that Daniel is doing so well that King Darius was thinking of putting him in charge of everything. King Darius was ready to promote Daniel higher than president, to be just under him. You know what this reminds me of? It reminds me of Joseph in Egypt. Joseph started out pretty humble, didn't he? He came into Egypt a slave. He wound up second in command of everything. It's amazing what God can do through people, right? So, what happens to people of power when they feel that their power is threatened? Do they accept that? Do they take it lightly? No. The other two governors and the satraps realize just how well Daniel is doing, and they don't like it. They decide that they have to get rid of Daniel because they see Daniel as a threat to their authority. They see him as a threat to their power. They see Daniel as a threat to their livelihood. Now, you know what we call this? We would call this today a political power struggle. They're upset because Daniel is doing such a good job and he won't do things the way they want to do. We know Daniel was a good governor. When we look at verse 4, it says they couldn't find anything wrong with the way Daniel did things. They said, let's read verse 4 here. The governors and satraps sought to find some charge against Daniel concerning the kingdom, but they could find no charge or fault because he was faithful, nor was there any error or fault found in him. Was Daniel good at his job? He was great at his job. They couldn't find a problem with him in his job. People find problems in my job all day. What about y'all? The other governors and the satraps realized the only way that they're going to get David, it's not going to come from the work that he does. It's going to come from the faith that he professes in his Lord. In verse 5, they say we're going to have to look to the way that he worships and to who he worships in order to trap him. So, let's see what happens. Verse 6 through 18. So these governors and satraps thronged before the king and said thus to him, King Darius, live forever. All the governors of the kingdom, the administrators and the satraps, the counselors and the advisors, have consulted together to establish a royal statute and to make a firm decree that whoever petitions any god or man for 30 days, except you, O king, shall be cast into the den of lions. Now, O king, establish this decree and sign the writing so that it cannot be changed, according to the law of the Medes and the Persians, which does not alter. Therefore, King Darius signed the written decree. Well, let's stop right here and take a look at this. Who is ganging up on David? Daniel here. It's kind of interesting. Yeah, his coworkers are ganging up on him. Somebody had a really good comment on Facebook. For those of you who are working at home right now, tell us what your children or the people you're stuck with are doing, your children or your pets or your spouse, but refer to them as coworkers. I imagine that's going to make for some humorous lines right there. Right away in verse 7, we see that these people are not truthful. Verse 7, it says, everybody came to him, to King Darius, and said, King Darius, we are all in agreement. All of your governors, all of your satraps, all of your advisors, all of us are in agreement. Is that the truth? No, Daniel wasn't in on it. I don't want to take this too far, but I find it kind of interesting, and I find it kind of mirrors today a lot how some people will say everybody is for this, when in actuality it's not near everybody who's for it. Some things don't ever change, even after 4,000 years. They go to King Darius and say, we want you to pass a law. For 30 days, you, King Darius, will be the only God allowed in our land. For 30 days, if anyone prays, they must pray to you, King Darius, not to their own God, not to their shrine. They must pray to you. This is kind of interesting because at this time, this was not a normal feature of society. Later on, certain kings would develop a complex and think of themselves as gods. But as near as we can tell from some of the other historical writing, Darius never thought himself as a unique god. He may have thought a lot of himself, and he may have thought of himself as a god, but he never thought he was the only one. The advisors, the satraps, the governor, everybody except Daniel goes to him, to King Darius, and says, we want you to pass this law, that for 30 days no one can pray to anyone except you. Now, was this just a regular law they were trying to pass, or was this a special law they were trying to pass? This was a special law. When we look in Scripture, we see that they quantify this. And they say in verse 8, the law of the Medes and the Persians, which does not alter. What this meant is if this law was written according to this decree of the Medes and the Persians, it could not be changed. I think we're seeing a real good example of some things right now. How many of the laws in the United States cannot be changed? I would have said that a while back, but since we're now in a state of emergency, guess what? The government's got a whole lot more power than most of us think about. Not calling for revolution. Don't put me on the conspiracy channel. During certain times, our government, in order to protect its people, can revoke certain laws. In biblical times, the ruler, the king, the person in charge had authority to revoke certain laws. What the satraps, what the governors, what Darius's advisors are doing is they are trying to make Darius pass a law that it would be incapable of changing. The law, according to the Medes and Persians, cannot be altered even by Darius. This is a law that is greater than him. Now, this is pretty big because most kings, most rulers wouldn't pass a law that they themselves couldn't challenge. We see how sneaky these people are by getting Darius. They butter him up. King Darius, we don't think anybody should pray but to anyone but you for 30 days. We think this much of you. We think you're this great. Let's make you be the only one. So what does King Darius do? He falls for it. He signs it. Therefore, King Darius signed the written decree. This is important. Do y'all remember how a bill becomes law in the United States? I'm thinking of that Schoolhouse Rock special. Y'all remember that? A bill has to go before Congress, then the Senate, and if those two can agree on it, where does it go? It goes to the president. And what does the president do to make it an official law? He has to sign it. We still carry that tradition today. Y'all, Daniel knew what was going on. Daniel knew King Darius was writing this law and that King Darius was about to pass this law. Look what happens in verse 10 and on. Now when Daniel knew the writing was signed, he went home. And in his upper room, with his windows open towards Jerusalem, he knelt down on his knee 3 times that day and prayed and gave thanks before his God, as was his custom since early days. Now this is a big verse. Let's take a minute on this. How does verse 10 begin? Now, yeah. What's the first sentence? Daniel knew that the writing was signed. Daniel knew that this was now law. Daniel knew what trouble he would get into if he violated this. But Daniel decides that he's still going to praise his God no matter what the law says. Where does Daniel go? When we look, the New King James says, and in his upper room. Now this is important. This was a special place set aside in the household. The upper room was an area specifically set aside for prayer, for mourning, and other acts of religious dedication. It was an area of the house reserved for those times where you sought God through prayer, through devotion, through whatever. It was somewhere that you went only when you were seeking God. When Daniel goes to this place, what is he doing? He's going to seek God. He's going to pray. He's not going to Darius to do this. He's going where he has always been. Now, the only reason Daniel would have gone into that room was to seek God. But there's more to this verse than just that. My translation says, with his windows open, what does y'all say? Which way were they open to? Towards Jerusalem. This is a habit that the exiles got into. Whenever they would pray, they would orient their bodies and they would look to whichever direction Jerusalem was in. Daniel is not only going to his secluded, quiet, special place to pray, but he is also opening the windows and facing Jerusalem. He did this as a sign of respect to the temple where God's presence was where he thought God's presence was. Daniel is being very, very overt about this. He's not trying to hide it. He's doing the things that he has done every day of his life up until this point. Now, does Daniel sneak into his prayer room for 2 seconds of prayer and sneak about and goes about the rest of his day? No. Scripture says he knelt down on his knees. How many times? 3 times that day he prayed. If you're sneaking away to go to a special room to do something that you're not supposed to do, you're throwing the window open, you're praying out loud, and you're doing it 3 times a day, are people not going to notice you? Somebody's going to catch on to this pretty quickly, especially if they're out to get you, like so many people in the kingdom were. Look at verse 11 and 12 with me. Then these men assembled and found Daniel praying and making supplications before his God. And they went before the king and spoke concerning the king's decree. Have you not signed a decree that every man who petitions any god or man within 30 days except you, O king, shall be cast into the den of lions? The king answered and said, this thing is true according to the law of the Medes and the Persians, which does not alter. So, these people had set a trap for Daniel, and they were there. You know, they were just watching, waiting, hoping that Daniel would mess up. And they knew that he would pray to his God and not to King Darius. Oh, yeah. We're going to get into that in a minute, but Daniel was very open about his prayer life. These people catch Daniel. And they go to the king and they say, King, you passed a law. You passed a law that can't be changed. That anyone who prays to someone aside from you is going to get thrown in the lion's den. Y'all, there comes a time when we have to make a choice. These 2 other governors, all these satraps, all these advisors, whose approval, whose authority, who are they looking to please? Men. Who was Daniel looking to? Who was Daniel trying to please? Who was Daniel serving? God. There will come trying times when we must make a decision. Are we serving ourselves or are we serving God? Daniel stayed true to his Lord. Daniel kept doing the things that he always did. Now these advisors, these other people, they thought they had won. They had the king trapped. They said, King, you remember that law that you made that can't be changed? Well, Daniel's broken it, so you know what's going to happen to Daniel now, don't you? Daniel's going to have to be cast into the lion's den. Now, some of the commentators that I read preparing for this, they made a very interesting note here. When we move down a little bit, in fact, let me read it. Let me read 13 through 16. So they answered and said before the king, that Daniel, who's one of the captives from Judah, does not show due regard for you, O king, or for the decree that you have signed, but makes his petition 3 times a day. The king, when he heard these words, was greatly displeased with himself and set his heart on Daniel to deliver him. And he labored till the going down of the sun to deliver him. Then these men approached the king and said to the king, King, O king, that is the law of the Medes and the Persians, that no decree or statute which the king establishes may be changed. So the king gave the command, and they brought Daniel and cast him into the den of lions. But the king spoke, saying to Daniel, Your God, whom you serve continually, he will deliver you. So, does the king want to throw Daniel into the lion's den? No. The king's upset. The king doesn't want to do this. He likes Daniel, and he struggles with this. But what do the advisors keep reminding him of? You can't change this. This is done. There's no way you can change this law. It's interesting when we look at this. The king finally is resigned to doing what he must according to the law, and he throws Daniel into the lion's den. Some of the commentators that I have read compare verse 16, casting Daniel into the lion's den. They say that it is very similar to several of the Psalms in which David speaks about being cast into the underworld. And for all intents and purposes, what was the king doing to Daniel when he cast him into the lion's pit? How many people expected Daniel to survive? Nobody. Daniel didn't stand much of a chance in there. But there is hope. What does the king say in verse 16? Daniel, your God, who you serve continually, he will deliver you. That's a pretty amazing statement of faith, isn't it? Especially for a king who doesn't claim to believe in this God. He has seen Daniel's love. He has seen Daniel's dedication. He has seen the faith that Daniel has in his God. And because of that witness, the king says, your God will save you. Now, after they throw Daniel into the lion's den, verse 17 has some important information. A stone was brought and laid on the mouth of the den, and the king sealed it with his own signet ring and with the signet of his lords, that the purpose concerning Daniel might not be changed. So if this happened nowadays, what would people say? They would say that somebody came after everybody left, they opened up the lion's den, and they pulled Daniel out, and he spent the night somewhere else, and they put him right back in before it happened. Conspiracy theories. What the king does is the king seals the lion's den with a stone. And the king takes his ring and he puts his seal upon it. Not only his seal, but the seal of his advisors and the seals of those around him. You want just an interesting side note of history here? We have a historian from this day who described King Darius. And he actually not only described King Darius, but he described the signet ring that King Darius wore that he used to seal all the official documents. This would have been the ring King Darius would have used to seal Daniel in the lion's den. You know what his signet ring, do you know what the picture on it was? It was a king hunting a lion. Darius, believe it or not, actually kept lions around his capital. Assyria, the area where Darius ruled right at this time, had a zoo. And it was one of the more popular attractions to have these lions in the zoo. As much of an attraction as it was to have these lions in a zoo, however, the real reason Darius kept these lions around was because Darius loved to hunt lions. This was a way of showing the world just how great, just how awesome that he was. He would have lions captured, and whenever he felt like going out and having a hunt, he would have one taken to a certain area and released, and he would hunt it. Kind of like some people do today when they go to these farms and shoot deer that are fenced in. I don't know how much of a hunt that is. Darius had a lot of lions laying around. And it's at this point, Darius, who has known what a lion can do, Darius, who's very familiar with lions. I think I've asked y'all this before. Y'all ever been to the zoo and see the lions? They're some pretty big animals, aren't they? You know how powerful a lion is? A lion will mess you up in a heartbeat. This is what the king's doing. The king's taking his friend and he's throwing him into a pit of lions and he's sealing him up for the night. The king says, maybe your God will save. No, he says, your God will save you. Look what happens to the king. Verses 18 through 20. The king went to his palace and spent the night fasting. No musicians were brought before him. Also his sleep went from him. Then the king arose very early in the morning and went in haste to the den of lions. And when he came to the den, he cried out with a lamenting voice to Daniel. The king spoke, saying to Daniel, Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, who you serve continually, been able to deliver you from the lions? How much did King Darius care about Daniel? A lot. Excuse me, let me clear this out. We see that after throwing him in the lion's den, the king went home. And it's very interesting and it's very different because this night the king, he didn't have entertainment brought into him. One of the perks of being a king was you could have a feast every night. The king didn't have food. He didn't have people come sing for him. He didn't have people come dance for him. He didn't have people come and try to make him happy. The king spent the night in anguish. Y'all ever have a night when you're so worried about something you can't sleep? Last night. King Darius had a real rough night. All he can think about is what's going to happen to Daniel. When we look at Scripture, verse 19, how early did the king run out to check on Daniel? Very early in the morning. Some other translations have at first light. He wanted to know, and he wanted to know quickly. So he gets there, he has the stone rolled away, and this is really, really interesting. Look what the king says. Daniel, servant of the living God. We've talked about this a little bit when we talked about Ruth. This was a Jewish way of referring to God. This was a very Jewish way to address God. Has your God, who you serve continually, been able to deliver you from the lions? And what happened that night? Was Daniel okay? Look at 21 and 22. Daniel said to the king, O king, live forever. My God sent his angel and shut the lion's mouth so that they have not hurt me, because I was found innocent before him. And also, O king, I have done no wrong before you. So, what's miracle number one here? Miracle number one, Daniel's alive. Daniel's not even hurt in all of this, which really boggles my mind because even if you're around big animals and those big animals love you, every so often a big animal is not because he wants to hurt you, not because he hates you. Every so often a big animal is going to step on your toe, he's going to lean up against you, he's going to hurt you in some way. Daniel's not hurt at all. What does Daniel say happened last night that kept him safe? God sent an angel to shut the lion's mouth. God sent an angel to protect Daniel from the danger that was all around him. We need something like that today. We do. Lions were very well known for being extremely ravenous, especially lions that were kept in captivity. They weren't usually fed as much as they should be, and any chance they had to eat, they would take. Being thrown in the lion's den in ancient times was seen as a bad punishment because there was not really any hope whatsoever of surviving it. These lions would fall upon whoever was thrown into the pit and immediately devour them. The fact that Daniel survived, not just being thrown in the lion's pit, but survived all night in there, shows that God's protective power is great enough to keep him no matter how big, no matter how dangerous, no matter how horrible the threat is. I think we all need to be reminded of that today, don't you? No matter what threat it is we may face, who's bigger than that threat? God is bigger than that threat. God is bigger than anything that we will face. They have not hurt me, because I was found innocent before him. And king, also, O king, I have done no wrong before you. Uno momento. Hello? I'm good. Yeah, we're doing a live stream of Bible study right now. What's up? No, I told people to call in with questions. That's why I'm answering. You want to bring it on by? Okay, bring it on. That'd be awesome. Um, no, but I can get it unlocked for you right quick. Well, just pull up and we'll take care of it. Honk your horn. Thank you. Uh, so, Matt, come here for a minute. So, Daniel does nothing wrong, and God sees that. God shuts the lion's mouth and protects him. How many of us, how many Christians out there are running around right now like a chicken with their head cut off, thinking the world's about to end? We're scared. There's a whole bunch of people that are scared. Somebody's bringing some food to put in the fellowship hall. Daddy's a horrible throw. I have no sporting ability. I'm sorry. What can we take from what God did for Daniel? We have all these people out there right now who are saying, have you seen some of these people saying, if you drink this, you'll be safe, you'll be fine? You heard about some of these people, if you drink silver, you'll be okay. There was a church in South Korea that said something about inhaling salt water will keep you safe. You know, God gives us good people. But in the end, who's going to keep us safe and who's going to watch out for us? God. Daniel never wavered. Daniel's faith in God was strong, even in the face of lions. Even when he could think that it was all over, Daniel's faith remained strong. God delivered Daniel literally out of the mouth of the lions. Now, I know there's some people out there that would look at this, they'd look at this story and say, oh, the lions were sick that night. Or, oh, maybe the lions were full, they didn't want to eat anything. Look at verse 23. The king was exceedingly glad for him and commanded that they should take Daniel up out of the den. Daniel was taken up out of the den, and no injury whatever was found on him, because he believed in his God. Y'all, I cannot tell you, Chewie's about a third the size of a lion, and he's nothing but love and drool. But even with all that, he'll walk around. Sometimes he'll step on you, he'll whack you with his tail, or just him being loving, you'll get hurt, you'll get a bruise. Daniel spent the night with a pack of lions. Nothing. Verse 24. And the king gave the command and brought those men who had accused Daniel and cast them in the den of lions. Them, their children, their wives, and the lions overpowered them and broke all their bones in pieces before they ever came to the bottom of the den. To the cynics out there that would say that these lions were sick, that they were full, no. Because what happened to these people who accused Daniel the moment they were thrown in? Not a chance. It clearly says that they were dealt with before they even hit the bottom of the pit. Y'all, what happens when you conspire against God? It's not good. What happens when you go against God's will? Not good. These guys tried to outsmart, to outdo, to undo what God was doing. They got gotten for it. Now let's compare this story of Daniel with where we are today. What is out in the streets right now seeking to consume people? A virus. We are canceling things right and left. I don't know how many businesses are going to go out of business because of this. We are under such fear right now that we're not even able to carry on our daily lives. Schools have been canceled. I don't know how many of y'all have seen that meme that's going around, prayer and spanking are back in schools now. So much has been upended. What's the constant in all of this? What's the one thing that never changes? God. We have allowed ourselves to fall into the devil's trap. Because of what the devil has done, our worry, our concern, has gotten the better of so many of us. We're not living as people assured of tomorrow. We're not living as people assured by our God that he's going to take care of us. There's so many of us living in fear because, this little bug may come up and grab us. I don't mean to make light of this virus. I know that it can be bad for certain people. I know that. But we're canceling church. We're canceling everything, and people are falling away from where they need to be. And I hate to say it, but I guess I should say this. We're all on a ship, and that ship starts sinking. And the person that has the plug, and the person that has the hammer, and the person that has the know-how to use the plug and the hammer, they all start jumping up on deck and looking for a lifeboat. What's going to happen to the big ship? It's going to sink. Now, if the people that have, the person who has the plug, the person who has the hammer, and the person who has the know-how, if they calmly get together and look at the problem, what are they going to do? They're going to fix it, and everything's going to be okay. I said Sunday, this is a sign, and I stand by that. Our country, our community, we have all taken our eyes off God and focused on far too many other things aside from him. I truly believe the Lord is using this to make us realize we have taken things for granted. We have turned our back on him. We need to get right. Daniel survived the craziest, most insane thing. He spent a night in the lion's den without even a scratch. I know I may be reading this too literally, but it doesn't even say he had a flea bite on him. Daniel did all this because he trusted in God. Maybe we need to reassure some people around us that even in all this craziness, who's still in charge? Who still has a plan? Who can overcome this without even thinking twice? God. Y'all, what did Daniel do once the decree was signed not to pray to anyone but Darius? Did he change his routine? Did he stop doing all this stuff? Did he huddle in a corner? He kept seeking God. He kept praying to God. He went to his place. He prayed, and he prayed. Maybe that's something all of us need to do. Maybe we all need a little upper room in our house where we can go set aside from everyone else so that just you and God can get together and pray, communicate, talk to each other, listen to each other. Now more than ever, we need to be seeking God, not running away like Chicken Little. So, that's my thoughts and comments for tonight. Anybody? There is a very interesting sidetrack that would probably be a whole nother Bible study. But the book of Daniel has some pretty interesting expressions of God in it. Number one, Daniel surviving the lion's den. That's pretty huge. Daniel has already interpreted Nebuchadnezzar's dream. And as we look at this, we have to also see that repeatedly the king says, Daniel, may the God who you serve deliver you. Actually, he doesn't say that. I'm sorry. Your God who you serve continually, he will deliver you. That's a statement of faith right there. Yeah. It's kind of it's a very interesting thing. And like I said, this will be a whole other study because he says your God will deliver you. But then the next two verses, he's tossing and turning all night. On the surface, we could say that's a really interesting juxtapose between faith and doubt. In reality, I think that is a great picture of us. We know God will, but we still lose sleep. We still toss and turn. We still can't eat because we worry about it. So, it's a shame we don't spend more time in the Old Testament sometimes. There's some awful good stuff in here. Y'all, be strong. Candy just sent me a message. If any of y'all are out there and you need a little extra food, we do have a casserole ministry going on. Send me a message. Once again, 910-988-8982. We'll see what we can do. Mac, go on out there. I'll shut it all down in a minute. Go on out there and meet them when they get here because they're in a hurry. So, that's all I got for tonight. Donald, will you close us with a word of prayer? Amen. Y'all be safe out there.